Hello, this is Lindsay Martinez, and this is my presentation for the Conservation Education and Outreach Working Groups Symposium at the 2025 Wildlife Society Conference. I'm coming to you from the East Foundation in very deep South Texas, where we do ocelot research and conservation on our private ranches. And I'm here today to talk about the communication work that we do to support broader scale conservation of the ocelot on private lands, the ocelot being an endangered species and a predator. To give a little bit more background into ocelots, they've been listed as an endangered native species in the United States since the 1980s. And today, the only ocelot populations that are remaining in the US are found in just a couple of counties in coastal South Texas. Now, Texas is a private land state, over 95% privately owned. So it's pretty widely recognized that conservation of ocelot relies on private landowners and private land stewardship. The challenge with this, of course, comes from the protections that ocelots have as an endangered species and some of the concerns that landowners have that if they engage in ocelot conservation, that they'll then be exposed to Endangered Species Act regulations that could restrict or otherwise impact their work and their livelihoods. Now, the East Foundation, we're a really unique example of a private landowner in South Texas. We operate our properties with the mission to promote the advancement of land stewardship through cattle ranching, through research, and through education. One of our properties highlighted here is home to wild ocelots. It sits within the occupied range of ocelots in Texas. So we are protecting ocelots in their habitat on this property. We also do a lot of research on ocelots there to inform conservation. Together with a group of partners, we've actually put together plans for an ocelot breeding and reintroduction program to support ocelot conservation. We're building an ocelot conservation facility in Kingsville, Texas, where we will be breeding ocelots. And then we're going to be reintroducing offspring onto this other highlighted East Foundation property to start a new population in their historic range. The East Foundation and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service actually created a safe harbor agreement for that reintroduction so that ocelots can be reintroduced to this property with regulatory assurances on the freedom to keep operating the property. Now, everything that the East Foundation does, protecting ocelots, researching them, planning conservation work, we're very public about. And so that takes me to our communications work that we really do to expand awareness of ocelots and build support for them. Now, I think it's part of this sort of communications puzzle for ocelots. It comes down to three pieces. Um, a sort of crafting a key core story with supporting key messages, identifying who the relevant stakeholders to talk to are, and then utilizing different communication methods to talk to those stakeholders. So, versus the core story and the key messages for ocelots, first we need to talk about their ecology. Ocelots are this elusive endangered cat found in South Texas. And yes, they're a predator, but they're small. They're nocturnal, they're shy, they're scared of people, they hunt small mammals. They're not anything that's going to be attacking humans or cattle as this scary predator species. When we talk about ocelot conservation, we really talk about the importance of private land stewardship. Almost all of the occupied or potential ocelot habitat in Texas is going to occur on private lands, and it's up to private landowners to really do ocelot conservation. Now, it's really been big private ranches in South Texas that have maintained wide open spaces and avoided development that we still have ocelots today, and those private landowners are also the key to recovery. We're very lucky that ranching and ocelot conservation are compatible. Ranching provides the habitat for ocelots, and ocelots don't attack the cattle at all. Now, with private land stewardship being important, that of course brings challenges and barriers from the Endangered Species Act. But in our messaging, we say that we think some of those challenges can be overcome and addressed with things like safe harbor agreements and regulatory assurances, with data privacy, and with creating relationships with the Fish and Wildlife Service. For the stakeholders that are important for us to talk to, first and foremost, there's always the general public. So the folks in South Texas, that their home is going to be the home of ocelots, and they need to know that this isn't a predator that they need to be scared of, but one they can coexist with. And these are the people ultimately through maybe their actions, their advocacy, their votes, the things they choose to donate their time and money to, could potentially support ocelot conservation or it could support development that, removes more wildlife habitat. Landowners, of course, are super important stakeholder here. Again, these are the folks who control and own the lands where ocelot conservation can happen, and they can choose to open their gates to that work or keep them closed. And then finally, there's all sorts of researchers, zoos, agencies, NGOs out there who have some kind of expertise or authority over ocelots, and they could be potential partners to support conservation in Texas if they know about what's going on here. And then the methods that we use to communicate with these different stakeholders, we've got events, we've got our communications team putting out information, we've got working with the media, and then we've got communicating to folks directly through relationships. So I'm going to talk through our three kind of key stakeholders here and tell you about what we're telling them and how we do it. First and foremost, with the general public, these are people who need to know just what are ocelots, what are some of their needs, what's being done for their conservation that the public could potentially support. And we communicate with the public in a variety of ways. First and foremost, by showing up to and putting on events for the public. So every year in South Texas, there is an ocelot conservation day at a local zoo that thousands of local people are attending. And so every year, the East Foundation is there. We have a booth where they're handing out information and talking to people about ocelots and our work. We're giving longer presentations. We're doing science activities with kids to help build that community awareness of ocelots. We also put on our own education program at East Foundation called Behind the Gates, where we take local school children onto our ranches. They get to walk around in ocelot habitat and do activities and lessons with us to learn about ocelots, private land stewardship, and more. The other way to communicate with the public is through communications that our own team puts out, our communications group. So they do everything from social media posts, that include some images and a little snippet of content. They work with us on longer newsletter or website articles where we get to give more detail about our programmatic work. We even had all the partners on the breeding and reintroduction project put together with their communications teams a public website, recovertexasocelots.org, so that folks out there can see and read everything they need to know about this project. Finally, your communications folks help you get connected with media. And there's been a huge interest in within the media and ocelots over these last couple of years. We've had lots of written articles, we've had TV episodes, videos, short films made about ocelots, where these journalists, come to our property, capture footage of us doing our programmatic work, get footage, photos of ocelots, do interviews with us, and then put together these stories that really let the world know about ocelots and our work. And now, one thing I will say about, I think, working with the media is that maybe they don't always get it, exactly right. Maybe there's a mistake, they aren't aware of something, maybe they're interested in just one piece of the story and not the whole thing. So I do think it's important for us to work really closely with a media partner when we are going with them to make sure that the message that ultimately comes out through their product is what we intended, right? And not something else. So our next stakeholder here, of course, are the private landowners, the people who need to know, what do ocelots need? How are they impacting other resources? What can be done on your private land to help ocelots? And what do you need to know about the Endangered Species Act? Now, landowners are probably hearing a bit about ocelots from the communications that we put out or the media puts out on us. But I think the best way that we've communicated with private landowners is a lot more directly through relationships with these folks. And so when the Safe Harbor Agreement is coming out, you're not communicating with landowners just through a press release by the Fish and Wildlife Service, but rather the East Foundation, who's their peer, has a relationship and invites other landowners, to come be on the ranch and have more conversation back and forth and discuss about ocelot conservation in the ESA, make connections between landowners and agencies. East Foundation being a peer really makes that possible. And even for the landowners, we don't know. We actually created a fact sheet about our Safe Harbor Agreement of questions and answers that we sent to a local landowner or property organization so that they can distribute to those members. And the information here was written specifically for landowners. Finally, the last stakeholder are those potential partners out there who could join ocelot conservation efforts in Texas. And they already know about ocelots, but they really need to know what's going on here if they're going to be able to support it. And again, I'm sure they're seeing about the about ocelots from the materials we're already putting out. But I think getting to have those more direct conversations that can only occur through relationships is best for communicating with possible partners. So whether it's, you have a connection from some other programmatic work, or you see someone at a conference or a workshop, or you just reach out to them to start communicating, that's really key. To give an example from our project, our veterinarian from the East Foundation has been traveling to zoos around the country over the last several years to do assisted reproductive procedures in ocelots. And when she's at these zoos, she's talking with curators and keepers, going out for lunch with them, telling them about the research and conservation work that we're doing in Texas to hopefully get those zoos to support. And it's been really effective. Now we see the AZA, the American zoos that have ocelots in the US, they are committing towards this SAFE program where they're going to be managing the zoo-based ocelot population to actually support conservation in Texas and not just be used for display. And so we've really seen whether it's for zoos or the Fish and Wildlife Service, having those relationships and doing that more direct communication has really increased their engagement with this effort, gotten commitments from these partners to support ocelot conservation. And the general public, their awareness of ocelots have increased so much thanks to our communications and their support as well. We're getting calls from folks who want to know, how can they help? How can I donate? How can I work with you? Can my lands be used for ocelot reintroduction? Tons of support out there for ocelots, and that's really encouraging. So just to end, if I had to give a couple lessons learned or recommendations from our Ocelot communication work, I'd say first and foremost, remember the three pieces of that communications puzzle. You've got to have your core story that you're trying to get across and the messages that go underneath it. You've got to identify who are the relevant stakeholders to really talk about, and then look at the full portfolio of different communication methods that you can use. When it comes time to doing those communications for any stakeholder, tweak that messaging so that it's relevant to them. Highlight certain things, frame it in a certain way that speaks to them, and then utilize a communications method that actually can engage that stakeholder. I think it's super helpful if your organization or some of your partners have internal communications or education folks, work with them. They're professionals at communicating. They've got your same mission. They know you. They're committed to doing right by you in communications and can be a huge help. They also can get you connected with media, which can just really extend your reach. Media can give you new, photo and video assets to use. I do just think it's important to be pretty highly engaged with a media partner just to make sure that the story that you really see comes through via their product. And then finally, remember that outreach to some of your most important stakeholders, whether they're community groups, landowners, potential partners, it's not going to happen through social media posts, but probably through relationships and direct communication. And if those relationships can be peer to peer, that's probably the most effective. Thank you so much.